What we're going to talk about is brain and behavior. It was previously presented, this particular presentation was presented on September 2010 here at Knollcrest. This will suffice as your annual reminder about dementia for those of you who are here today. Dementia is the progressive deterioration of thinking, ability, and memory as the brain becomes damaged. Symptoms: loss of short-term and long-term memory, impaired judgment and reasoning, changes in mood, behavior, and communication skills, all of which affect a person's ability to function on a day-to-day basis. And types of reversible dementia, and I'm really happy this is here because it's winter. Last Monday was Blue Monday, and on Blue Monday more people are depressed than at any other time of the year, apparently. So one of the reversible forms of dementia is depression. Medications can cause it more commonly known as a delirium. However, it's hard sometimes to tell the difference between a dementia and a delirium. But whenever we have someone whose behavior changes very suddenly here, we look at medications, infections, continence, something, you know, whether they're impacted, all of those things. We try pain, but medications do sometimes cause and frighten people tremendously because they cause an immediate change in ability to function. Some nutritional disorders, you know, they're not getting enough nutrition, and that some metabolic disorders, so that's why we monitor kidney function and things like that very, very closely. There are many progressive neurodegenerative diseases, and they are Alzheimer's disease, mixed dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal dementia, and vascular dementia. So these are diagnosed usually with our residents at the stage that people are. By the time they come here, they have had some form of dementia diagnosed. So people who would have a vascular dementia, that would be maybe they've had a stroke, and so they, you know, that has impaired their functioning. Certainly we're all very aware of the manifestations of Alzheimer's disease. We've had several residents here who have been clearly diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It's a bit of a conundrum because it presents differently from one day to the next. Certainly a mixed dementia. Lots of people with Alzheimer's disease also have vascular dementia because one of the predisposing factors for Alzheimer's is high blood pressure. So they are saying that it's really important to keep your blood pressure under control because it could impact on Alzheimer's. Lewy body dementia is simply a dementia, a name. It's the name of the plaques and tangles. It was a Dr. Lewy body who discovered these little Lewy body cells that are floating around in brains, attacking the important parts of your brain that tell you what to do. And it's located in a certain part of the brain, but it's visible on an MRI scan or PET scan so that they are able to say whether it's Lewy bodies or not. So a frontotemporal dementia is a toughie. It's the one in which people become less inhibited, and I think that we have maybe one person here with that particular problem. So they maybe wouldn't have, usually it's sexually uninhibited as well. So because that's the part of your brain that tells you don't take your clothes off in public, and you don't, you know, you have some social norms and barriers that are in place. That is when you have a frontal temporal dementia, that disappears. You lose your ability to filter and stop behavior that you don't know that the behavior isn't the right kind of behavior, and that's a real care challenge. Alzheimer's disease is progressive. The damage from the disease increases over time. It's degenerative. Brain cells degenerate or break down. It is irreversible. The damage cannot be repaired, and at present there is no known cure. There is, however, I just have to say this, there are, however, three good forms of medication. So that you may see people coming in here on Aricept, because what it does is it somehow it holds back. It's like holding back the dam of damage. and Exelon, and I think there's a third, Abixa. I kind of get mixed up with those three, anyway. They all have different names, both generic and trade. So, but the medication is really helpful, and I can really say that both in my working life and in my personal life, I have seen that a disease that would have progressed far more quickly has been slowed down, and that is that's really a hopeful sign. The difficulty with Alzheimer's disease is that you're programmed. There is a very strong genetic component, and by the time you're 30 years old, there's not much you can do to make yourself not get Alzheimer's disease. I heard Dr. Jack Diamond speak in June, and he is the head researcher for the Alzheimer's Society. And he says, you know, that you just can't stop it. By the time you're 30 years old, your plaques and tangles are there. It's a matter of when they start to break off and give you trouble. I was very heartened by that information, but it's the way it is. And it's a disease like any other disease. If you're going to get it, you want to hope you're not going to get it till you're in your 80s and you've lived a good life. You know, we talked this morning about a case where someone was in their 60s, and that's extremely, some people are in their 50s. Those are very, very early onset and very, I mean, any kind of Alzheimer's disease causes some grief and some sadness, but I think it's, as with any other disease, the earlier, the sadder, because the more of living a healthy, happy life you'll miss. But on this handout, there's a picture of the healthy brain and the Alzheimer's brain. There's no point in me even holding it up for you because it's so small. You'd need a magnifying glass almost in front of you to be able to see the difference. But the difference is that in the brain of a person with Alzheimer's disease or any form of dementia, the brain starts to change. The shape of the brain changes, it shrinks. All of those areas in our brain that work together to help us do everything are taking a bit of a hit, and they lose things. The one problem that's very sort of particular to Alzheimer's disease is that the functioning of a person with Alzheimer's can change from one day to the next. Very, very, very hard on families, extremely hard on caregivers, because the person who's giving care, one day somebody can do up their own buttons, and the next day they don't even know what a shirt is. One day they can feed themselves. The next day, that's meaningless, what's in front of them. It's almost, it's been very interesting for me because with my father has Alzheimer's, I think most of you know that. And one of the things that has happened is that he has maintained his ability to describe what's happening to him. And I've never, by the time I've worked with people, either, you know, seniors mental health or here, or any kind of long-term care facility, people have lost their ability to describe what's happening. And he's now saying when he can't understand something, he says, I'm blind, I can't see. That I'm not going to wear my glasses because I can't see. Luckily for him, he has had, to this point in time, some eye issues. And so that is a good, you know, he can say that and without having to say to us, I don't understand what I'm looking at. You know, I don't know who you are, you have to tell me, and you may have to tell me why you're here and all of those kinds of things. So it's really interesting that I didn't really realize that people could look at things they can still see, but it's like they're blind. And that for me was a really good description of, you know, when somebody sits down and looks at the table and they can't see the plate to be what it is, they can't see the fork or the knife, and we're there saying, okay, just pick up the fork, start eating that. You ate this by yourself yesterday, what's, you know, and tomorrow they sit down and they see a plate and a fork and a knife. So it's extremely challenging to give good, thoughtful care. And I just think that if we remember those kinds of things and listen to what they have to say and hope that as we're feeding them today, that tomorrow will be a good day and they'll be able to feed themselves. The other challenge is that families have been exposed to that kind of inconsistency prior to coming in, and you find different family members kind of not agreeing with each other about care approaches either, because the person who visited 3 days ago, had an absolutely intelligent conversation with mom or dad, and, now somebody's saying they can't find their words today. So you folks are really right there in the front of, figuring out whether this is a good day or a bad day, or a day that, you have to do things or you don't have to do things. And I think with family members as well, you can just be reassuring and say, today just isn't a day that your mom's brain is working as well for her as it did yesterday. And it's a disease. It's not the person, it's a disease. So that we're not looking at somebody who's making choices about what they will and won't do. They're not just being ornery, they just can't do it. And the difficulty that does come into play is that some family members will say, well, that particular person has been difficult to deal with all of their lives, and this is just an extension of that. So we have to reassure them that probably it isn't. That one of the things that a person loses when they have Alzheimer's disease is quite often their personality, and so their personality is who they are. That's their heart, that's the person, if they're lucky and they keep it, and people say, oh, mom has always been as sweet and gentle as can be, and she still is, but just can't do some things some days. That's a bonus, because then they're not attributing unnecessary angst to the disease. But it really is a disease process. And in this handout, it talks about how the brain functions. So on your left side, you've got language and analytical thinking skills. On your right side, you've got spatial relations and attention. So that it depends on which part of the brain is being affected. And to be perfectly honest, quite often with Alzheimer's disease, the entire brain is affected. So they can't, they lose their words. And that's really difficult, because until you think about how often you need to talk or read to get through this life, I mean, it's amazing. You think watching a movie, for example, would be a very straightforward thing. We sit people down and ask them to watch movies. Well, if you can't read the name of the store that some of the action is taking place in some movies, you've lost completely understanding of what you're seeing. And sometimes just the actual, what you're seeing doesn't make sense anyway to you, right? So anyway, the brain has many, many functions. Certainly, I was at something once where it was an amazing number of commands that had to go through our brain in order to brush our teeth. And I was like, oh my goodness. But any of you who have grandchildren and you watch how they learn things, or children, they don't start out talking. They learn to talk. They suck, then they learn to eat. I'm probably not doing it in the right order because I haven't watched it recently. But each activity that people learn, if you take a look at some of our residents and watch them, they're losing them almost in the same way as they learned them. And it makes it really challenging, because we can't speak to them as if they are children, because they aren't children, they're adults. We just have to be gentle and kind and recognize that what they can't do, they can't do, because their brain's not letting them do it that day. And if their behavior is difficult, or we consider it to be difficult or challenging to manage, just think how it feels to them. They don't know where they are. They don't know why they're reacting this way. And it's absolutely a terrifying experience, I think, the experience of any kind of dementia, because they lose. And they don't lose it evenly. So you build it on evenly. You eat with a spoon one day and a fork and a knife, and it kind of follows a pattern. But when you lose it erratically. So it's hard to build in controls. I mean, it's really neat if you can encourage them to have a sense of humor, like an adult sense of humor, if you can treat things gently. And when I talk about a sense of humor, I know you have to be really careful, because I personally don't have much of a sense of humor. And I sometimes think that I don't find things funny that other people would find funny. So you have to know your resident. You know, like if somebody thought it was really hilarious to dress me badly one day, like I wouldn't find that funny. But, you know, my kids might. They would think it was a hoot that things didn't match on me. But it's not, you know what I mean? So you have to be so careful. But to be gentle and to be able to smile and help people not be embarrassed by their losses. And I'm just thinking, I guess, of my dad, because my mom insists on putting him on the phone when I call to Florida. Well, he doesn't know which way to hold the phone. So sometimes he's going, Doris, you know, the phone doesn't work. Well, I know it's because the mouthpiece is up here and the earpiece is like on his cheek and he can't remember. So she puts, the other night she put the phone on, and I'll say, oh, Mom, just put the phone in place for Dad, please. So she'll do that. And she doesn't do it on purpose. She's just with him all the time and she forgets that he can't manage this, because, I mean, he's managed a phone all his life. So he gets on the phone and we moved, and so I was really excited, and oh, it's a great place, it's perfect, you can come and visit because the bathroom's right off the bedroom, and oh, Dad, you know, we haven't been able to have you guys down for a couple of years, it's been too dangerous, and I can hear him listening on the other end and thinking, and finally he goes, can we come for 2 weeks? And I said, sure, Dad. Mom's in the background going, not 2 weeks at Vicky's. And then he starts to laugh and said, oh, I forgot. And the words came to him, she'd be in control. And my mom doesn't like that. She likes to be in control. She raised me, though. So we're a bit alike. But you have to just kind of, you know, so I said, oh, Mom got on the phone. She goes, oh, I don't think he meant 2 weeks. And I said, Mom, I think he did. Dad likes to get you and I going. That's part of how our relationship has worked. You know, he usually defends me, and if I were my mom, I would have found it frustrating all these years as well, but I was the oldest child, and he kind of took over when my brother came along a year later. And she finally laughed and said, yeah, you know what? He's still got his sense of humor. And that personality piece is so important that we really want to work hard with people to maintain that and to really listen to what their families say is their personality. And I think you do a really good job here. I mean, we've got a really challenging gal that, you know, in the length of time she's been here, has really settled in well, and everybody has tuned into who she is. And I think that the staff get so that they can finish the sentences as well as family could prior to people being admitted. And I think the biggest thing, the other thing we have to look at is that when somebody comes here, the family is experiencing a huge loss, particularly a spouse, because they really, I've been watching, and it's gradual, but they really want to be the only person who can look after somebody. In their mind, they know that's not rational, but as long as they're the only person that can do it, then everything's okay. You know, they're still going to be able to live together. You know, life is going to at least be lived with two people who've been together for many years. And so we get the spouses who are grieving, and we need, and that I think everybody, it's really tough because the person who's being cared for, they're ready to transfer. They don't mind when someone else comes in and helps them with their activities of daily living. But the criticism sometimes that we receive from spouses isn't easy to deal with, but eventually I think that you've had lots of people here and you see that that changes, and that, you know, they learn to deal with the loss of that particular individual in a way that they didn't have to learn to deal with that loss while they're at home. So basically dementia is a challenge. Doesn't matter what the label or what level of cognition people have. Almost every single person who comes into a long-term care facility has some degree of dementia and some cognitive loss, and that's just due to any number of disease processes that are taking place and the kinds of supports that are out in the community. So we just have to be gentle, and it becomes every day for us. I mean, my siblings find it really funny that things that they think are kind of like really disasters and out of the ordinary, and I'm usually the disaster monger in the family, that I don't get whipped up about. But that's because it becomes our life here. And so we have to be really careful to make sure that our life is one in which everybody we're looking after feels respected, and that we don't use words like manipulative or they just won't do it. Those kinds of things, because people will do what they can do. And if you have cognitive losses, you really can't manipulate because you don't know how anymore. And there are people who, you know, have managed their families very well up till this point, and families will say, oh, she's always been a bit manipulative. Well, I think they've managed them, but they don't have that capacity quite often, so we just have to be supportive. So are there any questions or things that you would like to go back over? I'll give you these handouts, and we will really hope to have a clear, concise presentation by Sherry or Heidi for you to be able to watch at some other juncture. Okay?